Stephen, and Saskia and I are facilitators for the Inequality and Affordability Action Group. This summer, we focused on a broad array of inequalities through critical conversations, group projects, and individual-based research, and etc. The Inequality and Affordability Group is happy to show you some of what we've learned this summer, including education, housing, healthcare, etc. during COVID, where all these issues become heightened. But before we start, I'd like to introduce Saskia.
Hi everyone, I'm Saskia. I just want to say, and I feel I speak for all the groups, you guys have all done a fantastic job given the circumstances on your presentations. And yeah, I'll pass the mic on to Anthony.
Hello everybody, my name is Anthony and I will be your opener. I hope everyone is having a good night with us, and we are the Inequality and Affordability Group, and all I can say is strap on and relax. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. Nelson Mandela. So who are we? We are your friends, your families, and neighbors. We are the same people that face problems and struggles every day. We are no special nor different from you, simply the same cog in a bigger wheel called life. So why are we treated differently because of the color of our skin? From our identities to our beliefs, and from corruption's birth inequality. Yet we still desire the same goals and dreams, and still fight the good fight. So who are we? Simply put it, we are action makers who waited patiently for things to change. But now it's our turn for the spotlight. So give us a chance.
So what is inequality? Inequality, according to Merriam-Webster, is the quality of being unequal or uneven, such as a social disparity. So these social disparities or social differences are widespread. They include race, gender, income, and education inequalities. And these are only the tip of the iceberg of the deep roots of inequality in our society and in history.
Why does it matter? Inequality is one of the most pressing issues of our time. The inequalities in our school system, healthcare system, policing system, and criminal justice system leave millions of people at a huge disadvantage and leads to a lower quality of life that can cause irreparable damage. This is a growing issue we need to tackle head on. 2 in 6 Black women die in childbirth. 88% of police stops in New York City involving Black and Latino people, and 70% of them were innocent. From 2013 to 2017, it was reported that white patients get better health care. Black men receive prison sentences 19.1% higher than their white counterparts, and resumes with white-sounding names are 50% more likely to get a call back. Predominantly white schools receive better funding than Black and Latinx schools. We cannot keep allowing these inequalities to be a social norm. These actively affect not only us, but our brothers, our sisters, kids, and directly undermine the great democracy we say America is.
So income inequality is the highest of all G7 nations, and G7 nations are the world's 7 largest advanced economies. And as you can see from the graphic, the United States is the highest out of all of them. So in our inequality and affordability group, what we're focusing on most is creating more affordable housing, especially in areas that have become gentrified, lessening the technology accessibility gap, providing more resources for schools in low-income areas, making college more affordable, lessening the cost of healthcare, and lowering the homelessness rates.
There are many different types of inequalities, but 3 that I think are very important are income inequality, gender inequality, and social inequality. So income inequality is the difference between two groups. One group a smaller group that gets all the income, and a large group that gets a little bit of the income. And this is very unfair because why should one small group get most of the income while there's way more people that the income should be distributed between? and that leaves a larger group with barely any income. Also, gender inequality. I feel like this is very important because woman has been mistreated, well, not treated equal during the 1900s and 1800s, because during the 1900s and 1800s, women has been known to stay at home and do all the work. They weren't able to vote. They weren't able to go to work, and stuff like that. So I feel like that is a very important one. And still, the United States hasn't had a female president. I wonder why. So social inequality. This correlates to income inequality because a small group of people has more power than a lot of people in the world, and I feel like that is really a large group of people is at a disadvantage.
So these are some of the issues that currently affect inequality as it is today. First is gentrification contextualized to the New York area. 1/3 of low-income New Yorkers live in neighborhoods that are on the verge or are already being gentrified. Next is income inequality. This is contextualized specifically to Manhattan. And in 2015, Manhattan's top 1% earned 113 times more than the bottom 99%. Next goes on to medical disparities. And while this is contextualized to California, this is still crazy. An ambulance ride costs, on average, $1,772 and change. That is crazy. Next, when it comes on to education inequality, the story of Tanya McDowell stands out. She was a Black woman who was sentenced for 5 years for illegally enrolling her son in a Norwalk, Connecticut public school. All she was seeking was for her child to get a better education, yet she was criminalized for it. Next is onto the criminal justice system. And currently, out of the nationwide total for people incarcerated on drug charges, 56% of them were Black and Hispanic. And also, this kind of ties into income inequality, but when it comes to food disparities, lower income communities are often food deserts and they lack access to healthy foods, which can put them at higher risk for diseases such as diabetes.
So we just talked about a bunch of different issues, but a lot of them might seem a little distant to people who are teenagers or who are in high school right now. But that's because they've been made kind of taboo and people don't really want to talk about them. So here's some examples of how inequality can directly affect teenagers. Do you remember how in high school you constantly stressed about paying for college or even simply getting in? Did you try to create an impressive list of extracurriculars or take SAT prep classes on the weekends? Well, what if you worked to support your family or didn't have access to resources? How could you do all of your schoolwork, clubs, and SAT work while working all weekend just so that your family could put food on the table? If you aren't in that situation, have you ever thought that your classmates might be? Education inequality is just one example of how our society is vastly unequal, and it's visible at the high school level. Unfortunately, for many people who aren't members of the current ruling class, mainly white, wealthy, cisgender men, this only gets worse in adulthood. Seemingly simple inequities in our current system like these are common and too often overlooked. This inequality should not be taboo to discuss. We cannot work to eradicate it altogether without first addressing it openly.
Ben?
Voting allows you to speak up and solve problems that are important to you. And voting is also the best way to make your voice heard in your community. When you vote, you're not only voicing your opinion, you're also electing a government official who can represent your views and bring them to life. So if you care about inequality, the best thing you can do is vote for someone who stands for your issues and can actually fix them in office.
So having all this information and us doing all this research, how will we run an effective campaign? First is to identify the problem. it can be multiple or just one problem that you could focus on. And second step is to identify your target and how to reach them. For example, if you're trying to reach young audience, like digital campaign can be more effective compared to other types of campaigns. And number 3 is state the objective of the campaign specifically. For example, there's in only 21% of 18 and 19-year-olds voted in 2018 midterm elections. So for this, our objective would be, but we want to bring that number up to at least 60% the next midterm election. And number 4 is become an expert. Knowledge is essential to successful campaign. Use facts, case studies, figures to help make a case for a change. Number 5 would be creative, resourceful, recruit advocates and allies to help promote our cause, and set up resources available for assignment to project tasks. Simpler hashtags are more important. For example, Black Lives Matter, We Care, We Do Belong, and Me Too movements that have catchy and short phrased hashtags. Use images that have consistent aesthetic. It's important because our overall social media campaign will feel familiar but not repetitive to users who may come across more than one and ad that are similar to ours.
So now that you're hearing all these issues and how a better campaign would be made, who are the people who are trying to change these issues, trying to fix these problems? What are the movements that you can join to be able to fight for better equality? One of the movements is Black Lives Matter movement. And the person I chose to represent Black Lives Matter is Patrisse Cullors. She was the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. She's 36 years old, and one of her many books that she has written is When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. Another movement that is very current is the Me Too movement. And the activist I chose to represent the Me Too movement was Tarana Burke. She is 46 years old, a senior director at Girls for Gender Inequality, and started the Me Too movement in 2006 to help women stand up for themselves after experiencing sexual assault. The next movement that is also a youth-run movement is March for Our Lives, and the activist I chose to represent March for Our Lives was Aaliyah Eastman. She's 19 years old and she's a college student, and she's also an executive council member of Teen Enough, subsidiary of Brady Campaign, which was a marginalized youth leaders educating on gun violence, and also the co-founder of Concerned Citizens of DC, which are organizers to take streets of DC to better organize Black Lives Matter protests. And the last movement, which is a very big movement, is the climate change movement, which is by Shudakaz Martinez. He's 20 years old and the youth director of Earth Guardians, an organization of young activists committed to combating climate change in their communities. So now you see there are so many people who are trying to fight for a better world and fighting against inequality.
So, Kat, this is aside on the candidates and their current policies on inequality. So they're in the New York Congressional District 9 race in the 2020 primary candidates. Two candidates ran. The first, Adam Bunkadeko, supports greater funding for NYCHA, creating small business co-ops and mutual aid groups, ensuring affordable rent, and changing New York City school zones to desegregate schools, while the incumbent, Yvette Clarke, supports making housing more affordable, increasing access to health insurance, and she worked with the Congressional Black Caucus to help fight income inequality specifically targeted at Black Americans. She did end up winning the primary. And next, onto this greater election coming up, the 2020 presidential election that will be in November. First is the incumbent Donald Trump, who has fought for tax breaks for the extremely wealthy. And under Trump, some multinational corporations based in the US have relocated previously offshore jobs onshore. This basically means that jobs that were previously overseas in other countries were brought back to the US. And his family's real estate business has a history of discriminating against non-white tenants. And next is his challenger, Joe Biden. And quote, "The United States wasn't built by Wall Street bankers and CEOs and hedge fund managers. We need an economy that rewards those who actually do the work. He supports increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's your rundown on the current state of election, both local and presidential.
Okay, so losing your right to vote because of a prior or current felony conviction is another example of inequality, specifically systematic inequality. With over 6.1 million Americans who are unable to vote, we have already lost a huge part of our elections. Ex-convicts are able to still buy beer, own property, and drive. There are individuals who have integrated back into their communities, and their voices deserve to be heard. Some argue that so-called criminals are not trustworthy enough to be able to vote in elections. Yet if we thought that the criminals could never be reformed, they wouldn't be out of prison in the first place. According to the chart presented, 50.6% of these Americans can't vote post-sentence. They are in their communities, not behind bars. Felon disenfranchisement and race are connected. 1 in 13 African Americans are banned from voting because of the felony disenfranchisement that is still in the books of many states. These measures are used to strip the Black and brown population of their fundamental rights, and the impact of voter disenfranchisement on communities of color are very disproportionate. Losing your right to vote because of a past or current felony is not fair, nor is it ethical.
Since we're running an inequality campaign, we want to know if it's successful, right? So we will know our campaign is successful if we start to see change, and that is less racism, ageism, gender inequality, religion inequality, and of course income inequality, and other forms of inequality in our own community. Types of change. Since we want to know our campaign is successful, we need to know if there's positive change. So things to look out for is greater civic engagement, legislative reforms, men and women getting paid the same based on how many hours they work, no more discrimination based on sex, religion, race, or income, etc., not based on qualifications of a job applicant based on everything but their expertise, and not giving loans based on their race, but their eligibility. So on and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you all so much for sharing. So I'm going to open the